Benjamin Franklin once said, "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." The fact is, quality matters. Join us as we make quality fun, interesting, and accessible to companies of all levels. Quality Matters is a must-listen for all things quality. Listen in, ask questions, and get back to doing what matters most. Quality Matters, brought to you by Texas Quality Assurance, where quality management gets simplified.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Quality Matters podcast. I am Kyle Chambers with Texas Quality Assurance, and this is our software manager, Caleb Adcock. He is just really, truly become my right-hand man here at the company, and when you'll see some of the cool stuff that is coming out with TQA Cloud, which I think I say that a lot, but there's always cool stuff coming out. He is the genius and the brains behind it. So, Caleb, just update folks on the episode before we get going, so I don't blow a gasket.
So I've lost count of how many times we've attempted to record this podcast. We had some audio issues, had some stage issues, had some recording issues. So here we are. We've done it a couple times already, so we're experts on the article that we're going to talk about.
Yes, and we are for certain recording. We are a minute and 31 in. And all the audio is right.
The podcast has changed.
Huh?
I see the name of the podcast has changed. It's
yes. So the original name was "It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's a Door Plug of a Plane," but now it's the Never Ending Podcast.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. I mean, you should have seen recently. There's a plane. It was flying from Seattle to Ontario. About 12 to 15 minutes into the flight, a giant gaping hole appears in the side of the plane. There's a guy sitting next to the plane. I'm pretty sure I remember there even being a picture of him, like his shirt had gotten sucked off and out of the plane. His phone had gotten sucked out of the plane, which crazily enough.
Seventh time I've heard you say this, and I laugh every time.
We should have found the picture.
I just crack up thinking about this poor guy with your shirt ripped off when the door blew off the plane.
Yeah.
Like, this is comedy, but it's real.
Yeah. And I mean, they found his phone. It's crazy enough. Like, how do you find a cell phone that flew out of an airplane?
We had when I worked for Geek Squad. And yes, I work for Geek Squad. I have my Geek Squad badge still. We had an accidental damage in handling plan, and I had people bring a laptop to me in pieces in a box with sand and seashells.
Jeez.
And I'm like, what's this? And like, well, you said you have accidental damage on it. We paid for accidental damage. I'm like, that ain't accidental damage. Would the phone be covered there?
That's a good question. I'm thinking if I was almost sucked out of a Boeing plane, that Boeing's going to be covering my cell phone cost for that.
There you go. That's probably a better way to go.
Or the airline, whoever I'm mad at while I'm sitting there shirtless, freezing. But what it was there was what's called door plugs. And these are parts of an airplane where if, let's say you're building an airplane, but you don't necessarily know how many passengers are going to be on it, what it's going to be serviced for, then you may or may not have a door there. So this particular plane did not have a door, so you can't just leave a hole. You can't leave a hole there, so they have to plug the hole.
Well, we know what would happen if the hole was there.
Yeah, we know now that what would happen. So if you have to secure those bolts, and apparently one of our I'm in Wichita, Kansas now, so this is Texas, Kansas quality assurance, so a little bit. Right up the road is a company called Spirit, and apparently they built the fuselage that was used in this situation. Apparently they shipped the doors with these plugs in there. And disclaimer again, we're just going off public information and articles we've read. We're not pointing blame or anything. But apparently they shipped the fuselage, but at a later point during the process, there was a reinspection or a rework done on that specific door. The bolts that hold the door in place weren't reinstalled, and then it was never caught, during final inspection. So the topic of today is inspections during process. So that's kind of what we've been talking about these last 8 hours that we've been recording the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put a link to an article, and they have a video. And what's really interesting to me about the video is not a lick of the content in it, but the way that they start talking. Because all they do when they start talking is who's to blame. That's really all they care about, is who's to blame.
Yep.
And it's just a terrible, but very, very, very natural mentality.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as something happens, whose fault is it? I see my kids do it before I even say anything. You just walk in the room. I wasn't. He was. I'm like, you wasn't what? And he was. But it's natural, is my point.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Yeah. I mean, you never get to the true root cause, or what people hate to admit is the true multiple root causes.
It's like the first story of human existence is pointing blame at another individual, you know, if you believe that.
Yeah.
That aspect of it, you know. God came in, was like, hey, what are you guys doing? And Adam's like, she did it.
Yep. And so the kids weren't much better either.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of connection between kids and adults, sadly.
Yeah. So I mean, it's totally a natural way to go, but it's just so unhelpful. I mean, once you get negative emotions involved, you can't be objective. You can't. It's just impossible.
Well, and I mean, it's very, very, very high stakes. You know, Boeing's been in the news a lot recently with the 737 MAX. You know, there's been some other instances, and it was actually grounded, I think, for a time, if going off the top of my head, you know, and then it's just like when it rains, it pours, a door falls off during flight.
Yeah. So in this instance, I mean, like, what all, just again, you've got the inspection background, like, what failure modes do we have? Like, where could things go wrong? Not that you're an expert on the manufacture of these things, but.
So in this specific instance, it was a very intricate inspection process, very intricate communications process. You know, they're saying that potentially what happened was Spirit, which is in Wichita, is on site in Seattle, Boeing right now doing reworks for other stuff. So they've been in the news lately also. And, you know, these guys live in probably my area. I've seen Facebook posts of friends and that kind of thing, you know, just a local Wichita hubbub about, hey, Spirit was, you know, local news, all of it. So apparently they've got their own internal communication. Boeing's got their own internal communications. They've got a together communications thing. And apparently what happened is they shipped it good, but then once it got there, they found something else wrong with it. They took it apart. And then when they took it apart, that's whenever it wasn't, you know, there's I don't know if it's public, but in the article, it says there's an NCR for September where they did a rework on that specific plug. But apparently when they did the rework, then they forgot to put the bolts in, and off she went into the sky. So
just in that one little sliver. So good. They did an NCR, because Lord knows I talk all the time about NCRs and the value to the business, and I'll try to save you on that rant, because if you listen often, you've heard it a lot. But when you do an NCR, I mean, the basic way is you've got the basic NCR details, and then you have the disposition. And dispositions, what do we do about it? Now, to be clear, disposition does not mean anything related to prevention. Disposition just means, did we finish the work? And so you should have on an NCR a sign off of the person that did the rework, and a sign off of someone that approved the NCR. And here you likely would have had at least one other sign off by another inspector.
Yeah.
So I mean, at bare minimum, this was missed by 3 people.
Yeah. Well, and you have a reinspection plan, you know, which is usually, if it's something that's not documented and not already planned out, let's say this happens quite a few times, you probably already have a reinspection procedure. But if it's something weird, then you have to come up, okay, well, we had an inspection plan. What's the reinspection plan?
Yeah.
You know, and in this case, you deviated, and this is what happens with a lot of complicated defects and situations, is something happens to kind of stray you off the path, and then you got reactionary actions and unplanned events, and then the next thing you know, oh, well, it doesn't normally happen. Well, you got to still account for those kind of things, and you have to stop and analyze and, you know, create pivot essentially. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, we think about like this is aviation and inspection. So I think what probably comes to everyone's mind is like, this lab coat, manufacturing facility where every guy on the shop floor has 20 years experience and a PhD.
yeah,
But it's not that way in any industry that I've ever been involved in.
Nope.
It's average Joes
Yep.
that has knowledge, some experience, and they're doing the work.
Yeah.
And so I don't know these guys' process, but I guarantee they have something very akin to a job traveler, whether it's digital with a task that you sign off on or an Excel spreadsheet or, literal sign off. I could completely see them still having a manual sign off.
Yeah.
This is why we auditors freak out when there's a blank.
Yeah.
Because it creates a culture that sign off doesn't matter. And you might know why it's blank, but when something goes horribly wrong in the news, that's a failure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, who's going to say you remember why it's blank if that's not documented enough?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just really, this could have been very simple, basic behaviors and habits. I mean, I think people want to turn it into a really complicated ordeal, but it's possible. This is just as simple as, bad discipline on sign off on a work instruction.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, yeah, there's who knows.
But this could be super complicated. That there's all sorts of design flaws, and the bolts, maybe couldn't go in properly, and they, went to get a rework on that, and stuff got missed. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I read somewhere, that, like I said, they did the rework, and then it just never got put back together after the rework happened. And apparently there's some other bolts that are sitting there that kind of are, they're good enough to hold it on, but they're not good enough to, handle pressure and flights from Portland to Ontario, apparently.
Gotcha.
So it was secure, it wasn't visually defective, apparently, but and who knows how long it was flying like that before that actually happened.
Yeah.
But I think the key is, and something we've talked about these few times is the role of inspectors, the role of production, and, just how that culture is a lot of times. I think it's the natural, I don't know. I don't remember where I learned, when I was a welder and I was an inspector, and you go to a shop that doesn't have a very established quality management system, it tends to go like, so-and-so fitted up, they tacked it, another welder came along, he welded it, somebody may have cleaned it, and then the inspector comes along and looks at it right before it goes out the door, fixes any problems that happens. Well, let's say that you just spent a month building that, and the inspector comes in at the very end, or God forbid you ship the part, it goes to the customer finds it. The first question that's always asked is, who inspected that? And that's always kind of like, nobody taught people that, I don't know why the shop manager would always scream about that, but it's like, is that the question you should be asking rather than?
I think it goes to the human nature thing we want to blame. And that is in the whole chain, that is the very first link in the chain.
Well, and everybody wants to shirk responsibility. If you can put responsibility of the product on a single person, everybody else is more than willing to do that. Yeah. So, you got all these people involved in the manufacturing process, the welding process. Nobody's looking at it. They just expect it to, the inspector will catch it, and if not, it's his fault.
Yeah.
That's a
I mean, you can do just a real quick numbers game on it. So you talk about waiting on the inspector to catch it. Okay, well, let me ask you this: how bad's the your internal defect rate going to affect your escapes?
That's a good question. I mean,
if you have 10% internal rework before it goes out the door, I've worked on the shops who are like, we don't care. That's fine.
True.
Nothing went out the door that was bad. If we had to rework it, we don't care. That's our problem, not their problem. Well, it kind of is their problem, because if you have a 10% internal rework and your inspector misses 1% of the defects, I mean, you can do the math and figure out how many products you got to put out the door before will mathematically have an escape. On the other hand, if you can reduce the internal rework to about 1 or 2%, that alone hits you on that Six Sigma curve, which I'm not promoting the Lean Six Sigma methodology, but there's a point to where you want to get to about 1 in a million defects, and that's a pretty good goal.
Yeah. I mean, it all boils down to doing the right thing, like don't,
Mm-hmm.
I can remember as a welding inspector, I would walk up to, a lot of times I worked with guys I'd never even worked with before. I'd go, I was a third party inspector. They'd call us up and they'd say, hey, come do this inspection. I did NDT and stuff. First thing I'd ask them, I say, did you check this? Yeah, I checked it. Okay. And well, it's 3 inches off. You're missing 2 welds. So either you just lied to me or you got some learning to do, like about what you do. And I'm guessing 9, 10 out of 10 times they just didn't check.
Yeah. And you can train your team through just such a simple method. One little question each time they bring you something. You don't need a formal training program. You don't need them signing off that they understand. It's just basic behaviors.
Yeah.
I do it with my kids. If I tell, now that we're out on the farm, there's like all sorts of crap to do out there. Mm-hmm. And so if I ask them to do something, they're like, hey, Daddy, I'm done. Come look. I'm like, did you check it? And then you see their eyes bug out and they start thinking, and you see the lies start to form, but then no, they go back and forth. Adults do the same thing.
Yep. Well, and there's the mentality of a welder may come out and be like, well, that's your job as an inspector. Well, here's the scenario. I come out, you haven't checked your weld. I find a bunch of welds that are broken. Now you're sitting and paying me while I wait for you to repair your welds, as a third party inspector, which is not cheap. And when you could have just caught it on your own time or, just not done it. Like there's all sorts of little hidden costs. And the key point is just to get everybody involved in inspection.
Yeah.
Make it a culture.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, truly, like you need from sales, production, inspection, all of it involved because it's hitting all of them. Like, sales can only sell based on your production capacity. Again, we're talking about most service manufacturing type organizations. You've got a certain capacity. Well, your rework, that has a massive impact, not just on your capacity, but it's however much your labor rate was, your overhead rate, your material rate, all these go out. Usually comes out to somewhere about, 80 to 120 bucks an hour.
Yeah.
You've got not only that cost, but how much could you have made in that hour for another customer? Could you have made another sale? Could you have just added 3 months more revenue?
Yep.
We will never know because you're too busy doing rework.
How much is repairs and rework throwing off your estimation of timelines?
Yeah. And
how much is that putting out overtime?
I have this argument all the time with folks. Well, you do too. Is like we try to tell them you need to document your reworks. So like, well, we don't have reworks. I'm like, I don't mean customer identified reworks. Your internal ones. They're like, well, look, the guys just work on it. And if they have to rework it themselves and they found it, that's their own issue. I'm like, no, it really isn't. I mean, that's a bad culture to get into. I mean, you need to maybe define what an internal rework is, but like these are like cultural things that you have to define.
Yeah. And I mean, and look for them everywhere. You mentioned sales. Sales has their own product that they ship to their customer, which is the next person in line, what estimating or something like that. So, if there's mistakes made at the sales level and they aren't caught at the next level, you should have that mentality of, before you pass it on to the next person, is it good?
Yeah.
I think it should just be taught or ingrained. Check your stuff before you move it on in the process.
I think we've lost that though. I mean, like Caleb, I think you and I are probably the
don't get me started,
the youngest ones with this mentality. I mean, anyone younger than us, it's lost.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just sitting there thinking of fast food lines, restaurants, cleanliness. Like I can remember, and I don't know, I don't know what it was, but when I got my first job, I was afraid to make mistakes. I knew like if I didn't clean that right, or if I was going to get yelled at, I might even get, promoted, fired or whatever. But it's like now, I don't know. The whole conversation, but it just seems like, well, okay. It's like,
I mean, but we have to even question, like, does that play a role here?
what's the root cause? Yep.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, obviously we have no inside information. We just going off what's available and kind of just speculating and having fun here. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It really could be something as simple as their workforce just has a really poor work ethic.
Yeah.
And not that I've ever been to Seattle. I just know what I see in the news, and something about it just doesn't strike me as maybe the same work ethic as Central Texas.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Wichita too, Spirit's the one up there doing all the rework. So I don't know what it is. I'm sure there's probably somebody there that can tell us, but I doubt we will ever know. I think there's probably a lot of politics and a lot of laws and money involved in that investigation, and we'll get a story. That's for sure.
There you go. But it really could be something as simple, and this is true too, is 9 times out of 10, the simplest solution is the correct one. There's some theorem on that. I forget what it is, but the simplest possible solution is almost always the case. And if that's true, then this could boil down to basic disciplines and maybe just failure to have someone else check a rework instruction.
Yeah. Or just not following procedures or not communicating internally. Like, it could be any number of things, but it's
basic stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, we try and pick things out that are quality related and just, talk about them and all that kind of thing. And this is just, as an inspector, this is kind of something that just, I could just imagine it. It's like every inspector's worst fear. You're sitting there watching the news, and then something that you are a part of building or inspecting is on the news. That is definitely not what you want to happen. So, I feel bad for whoever was involved with that, and assuming that they were, trying.
Yeah. My heart's breaking for him right now, because I'm thinking, God forbid that was me in that role. Any one of these, potential folks, oh my gosh, I cannot imagine the absolute panic I would be having, knowing that not only am I about to lose my job, I'm going to have a really hard time landing that next one. How am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to provide?
Yeah.
And this stuff gets preached on the safety side of things, but maybe it's not quite, well, sometimes it is life or death, but for the individual, that makes a mistake, it's probably not life or death, but your mistake can cost you your everything. I mean, it really can. And I know this sounds like fear mongering stuff, and it's not that. It's just take not pride, but have confidence in the quality of your work. Integrity, these basic things.
Yeah, for sure. And it also is a designer of the process or of the system, don't let your whole system hinge on a single person, because they're gonna fail. That we're human, we will mess up. And if that mess up costs you and 1,000 other employees their business, from one person's mistake, your systems, needs to be redesigned. It's all wrong. So
I can't take credit for this, and I wish I could give credit to whoever it's due to, but this was back in I guess maybe 2009. I was in charge of our inspection program at the turbine shop I used to work at for a real brief period of time. Not that I was by any means an NDT inspector, but I wanted to understand the process, and I was trying to figure out, are we doing too much inspection, too little inspection? Are we doing it in the right places? We do it in the wrong places? What's more critical? What's not critical? And I mean, my brain is exploding trying to figure this stuff out. And I just remember article I read, this was, pre go to YouTube for everything.
Yeah.
He said, just map out your current process, all the ins and outs on it. And he said, then at every single point, say, what if this guy died of a heart attack today?
Yeah.
And then you go through the process. At what point in that process does him dying of a heart attack mean that someone else can't step in? And that helped us identify where our weak points were. And we found that, oh, wow, we are super reliant on this inspection step. And that's really what he meant, is that if we just skip this step, and we can't bring someone else in there with that same skill set, is that going to ruin our process? And that was the same thing, is to identify, when are we relying too heavily on a person?
Yeah.
And that's, it's just, again, it was a silly exercise, but that helped us go through and really kind of refine a couple of things.
Well, and I mean, the fact that you guys were looking for over inspection, to somebody that might sound counterintuitive, or it might sound, but And this is something that I learned from somebody who I highly regard, and they said, if your customer is not paying for quality, or the part you're making, I'm not saying do bad stuff, but you don't need to have a 5,000th of an inch tolerance on a yard or something like that. So
yeah,
make sure it's good, make sure it's functional, make sure your customers are getting what they're paid for, and you're doing what you say you do, but give them the quality that the customer's buying.
Yeah. I mean, but that's, again, these are just such basic tenets of quality management.
Yeah.
And, this is one thing that has surprised me do you realize we started this in 2018?
Jeez. Yeah.
That's a lot of episodes in case. Over the time we've been doing the podcast, like, we never get into complex topics.
Yeah.
We really don't. I mean, we don't need to. It really is. It's
There's a lot of them too. Yeah.
It's fundamental stuff. So,
and it really just pertains on what you do and what your business is, and what fits for you as a company. What the biggest thing is, just like I said, do what you say you're doing and make your customers happy. I mean,
all the complexity that comes in, the design and whatnot, but we can validate those things a lot easier than we can validate all the rest of the aspects of our business.
Yeah.
So, but this is a fun topic. Any kind of parting thoughts before we wrap up here?
Well, I can't remember if we talked about vendors on this iteration.
Ooh, that is right. That was a good seat. Sorry, everyone listening. If we're a little scatterbrained, it's because we are, as I'm talking, this conversation is repeating 5 times over, and I'm not always sure where I'm at in it.
What's that? Groundhog's Day? Is that the movie?
Oh.
We're doing the same thing.
Yes, that's the title. That's the episode title. All right. Okay. So yes, talk about the vendor aspect, because this is also fascinating.
Well, okay. So, and I know I did mention that Spirit was on site. It was Spirit's Wichita company. It used to be former Boeing before they moved to Seattle. Apparently, same building and everything. So Spirit is on site in Portland, Seattle. Spirit is on site in Seattle doing reworks already for Boeing. So, one of the things that we talked about was, if you ever do have, some sort of inspection, or let's say you have vendors that are doing reworks and stuff, you always want to be involved in that process. As an owner, or as the responsible person for the product, you always want to be involved with whatever's being reworked, whatever's being reinspected. And I think that's kind of what it sounds like may have happened. Was it went from one sort of communication, Spirit's internal communication system to Boeing's internal communication system. And, something was reworked, and then the route didn't pivot for whatever reason. I'm assuming because of miscommunication, but
I mean, it's easy to happen. I mean, now granted, in this case, I mean, it sounds like there's probably at least 3 people that had to miss something, but again, that's assuming that they're running a quality management system similar in quality to what we would provide, I guess.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of unknowns, but it's just, again, it amazes me how the simple solutions are almost always it. Now, sometimes, so you can get some weird complexities in here. We did an episode years ago called the 3 Stooges of Accident Investigation. But basically, it was the first accident investigation I was involved in. And all in all, there were like 11 different factors.
Yeah.
And had any one of them not been the case that day, guy wouldn't have got hurt. Now, bad stuff, would have kept going on. But like, it took all 11 things going wrong for bad stuff to happen.
Yeah.
And so that's where the complexity sometimes comes into play. But
yeah.
Well, anything else before we wrap up here?
We mentioned NCRs. Again, did we talk about it on this episode?
I'm not real sure, but okay. So I'll give them a little spiel on it, because this really is something I'm truly passionate about, and I know how goofy that sounds, but non-conformance reporting is great, because it's the only way you can identify these patterns or trends. And especially here, when we're talking about these internal reworks, Well, how many times does a guy have to rework his own part before he should really document it? Because otherwise all you're going to see is, oh, well, this guy took 2 hours on the step that was scheduled for 30 minutes.
Hmm.
And then you just move on because it's a blip, right?
Yeah.
But how many of those times was he reworking something because he was doing something wrong? I mean, like, again, in a weld shop, it could be something as simple as the way he's fitting the part up. You simply change the angle of one little piece, you relieve all sorts of tensions, and life's good. And this guy had to redo it 4 and 5 times because he just overheated that corner too much.
Yep.
I mean, but truly the only way you find these problems is when guys start reporting it.
Yeah.
And it was miserable for me. I hated it. But I went out on the shop floor for weeks at a time. I'd schedule myself for 2 hours a day. And I just go out there watching guys weld simply to watch if I saw someone reworking it so I could remind them that they needed to log a rework ticket.
Yeah. And it's definitely, you're going to get some pushback, especially to people that aren't used to that type of thing. Some of the guys may have been involved in that situation where you do that, but I agree. It's imperative. You have to know what's going on. That brings up another instance where, let's say you have a department where you're actually doing the cutting of the material.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if your problems start in that department, but you have a fitter or a welder who just, I don't care, I'll make it work.
Yeah,
it doesn't work that way. You're going to make it work, but you're going to spend an extra 30 minutes to an hour making it work.
Yep.
Why not just eliminate that in the beginning with an NCR in the, the burn department?
Agreed.
Yeah.
But this is a good point. That's a really good point, though, because that problem in this case would not have even been the welder's fault.
Nope.
He's taking more time to weld it up than was estimated. If he'd logged NCRs on that every single time, the problem could have been found that it wasn't him.
Yeah. Yep.
Again, like where I started with this is like blame is such a stupid way to think.
Yeah.
You never solve a problem if you're looking for blame.
And I've heard of people, they put into their systems, they say, look, if you weld that, that's you signing off on that.
Yeah.
And if you didn't measure it, like as a welder, and you didn't come in and you didn't measure it and you didn't make sure it was good to go and send it back to that other person who should have also checked it. I've seen instances where shops say that, no, you shouldn't have welded it if it wasn't good. Like, so.
No, but so much of that, though, again, it comes back to just basic work ethic.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to get political on it, but like, it's just a fact. Work ethic is dying. Here's something that's really scary. I read this. I'm sure it's worse now. I read this a couple of years ago that the median age of a welder, what do you think it was in America? The median age?
38, 40?
52.
Sheesh. Yeah.
I mean, we're just a few years away from half of our welders and all that knowledge and experience going away.
Yep.
That's scary. But
machine shop guys, you go into any machine shop, you're not going to see, you may see some young people, but it's going to be a lot of older people. Yeah.
You just don't. Well, this will lead into a whole other fun episode, but I think it all's connected. Like I've told my son, I'm like, I will send you, well, my oldest one, because he's a sophomore right now, so we got to have these conversations. Like, we'll pay for you to go to college. You get into a good program for what you want to do. We'll pay for it anywhere.
Yeah.
On the contingency that you also get so many welder certifications or an HVAC certification or plumbing certifications. We'll pay for college contingent. You get certified in a skill.
Yeah. Yep. I think the pendulum will swing back. You talk about all these welders being gone. Like, we're either going to have to import that production, or we're going to have to pay people a crap ton of money, become welders. And then sure enough, people are going to sign up to do it. So there may be like a gap of crap, what do we do? But you pay them enough.
Point. Okay. You're pulling me back from the ledge. Getting all pessimistic, but you're right. It'll all correct, but yeah.
I think it just depends on how long it takes that pendulum to swing back, because during that time where you got no production, that's not a good time. That hurts everybody. So.
Well, I think any young folks listening and learn to weld.
Yeah.
It is a dying breed, and there is no lack of need for it.
Yep. Welding, plumbing, heating, air conditioning. Yep.
In any case, we've gone on enough little side rants. I think this is my least fun and, I don't know, maybe most fun podcast in a while. But it's over. Okay. Well, with that, we will say goodbye. If we did not totally annoy you today, please like and subscribe. If we did annoy you, issue an NCR and we'll handle it from there. Y'all have a good day.